Good afternoon, good morning, whatever time of day you're watching this video, fifth grade. It's Miss Harvey again, and we are going to do some math review. Today is Friday, October 9th, and we are going to talk about rounding before you complete an Edulastic assignment on rounding. So at the top of my paper, I have some information that's going to help you learn how to round. Before we talk about that, I want you to grab your slate and a marker or pencil and paper so that you can do these examples with me. Pause the video here to grab those materials. Okay, so when we're rounding, we always want to make sure that we use a number line with endpoints and a midpoint. So whenever I say use a number line, fifth graders always roll their eyes and groan, why do I have to use a number line? Well, you may be thinking a number line is going to be a really tedious process. That means really long and hard. But making a number line is actually really, really quick. And it's the only way to ensure that your answer is going to be 100% accurate. So you should always use a number line when you're rounding and make sure it has endpoints and a midpoint. Then you should put the numbers that you're rounding on that number line. And after you put that number on the number line, you should decide if you're rounding up or rounding down. So let's do the first example together to make that make a lot more sense. Round to the nearest 10, and we have 68. Underline the digit that's in the tens place. Right, the 6 is in the tens place. So we're rounding to the nearest 10. So we want to only keep the tens place in mind when we're coming up with our endpoints. For your first endpoint, you always keep that place value the same. So my first endpoint in the tens place is going to be a 6. And in every other place value after that for my endpoints, I'm just going to put a 0. So the 10 that comes before 68 is 60. To come up with my other endpoint, I'm going to add 10 to 60. So the next 10 after 60 is 70. To come up with my endpoints, I first figured out the place value I was rounding to. Then I thought to myself, what is the nearest 10 below 68? And what is the nearest 10 above 68? Now I have to come up with my midpoint. To come up with my midpoint, I keep the same digit that's in my first endpoint in the place value that I'm rounding to. So remember, we're rounding to the tens place, so I'm going to keep a 6 in the tens place. And then in the ones place, in the place value directly to the right, I'm always going to put a 5. That makes sense because in between 60 and 70, the midway point is 65. We know that because half of 10 is 5. Now that I have my endpoints and my midpoint, I'm going to place the number 68 on my number line. 68 would fall somewhere around here. I use my midpoint of 65 to tell me whether or not I'm going to round up or down. Remember, if it's 5 and up, you round up, and if it's below 5, you round down. Well, 68 has an 8 in the ones place, which is bigger than a 5 that the midpoint has in the ones place. So that means I'm going to round up to 70. Let's try another one. Round to the nearest 100, 543. Right now, I want you to write down 543. Underline the digit that's in the hundreds place. Right, there's a 5 in the hundreds place. Now let's make an empty number line. So make your empty number line. And just put those hash marks for the endpoints and the midpoint. We don't know what they are yet. We're rounding to the nearest hundred. So remember, like I said, for your first endpoint, the digit that's in the hundreds place, the place value you're rounding to, is going to stay the same. So I'm going to have a 5 in the hundreds place. I have 2 additional place values in my number. I am going to make sure that I put zeros in those place values. This makes sense because the nearest hundred before 543 is 500. Then for our next endpoint, we add 100. What is 500 plus 100? 600. Now, to come up with our midpoint, we keep the same digit in that hundreds place that we have from our first endpoint, and we always put a 5 in the next place value to the right. And in my last place value, the ones place, I'm going to put a 0. Our midpoint is 550. That makes sense because half of 100 is 50. So in between 500 and 600 is 550. Place our number 543 onto your number line. 543 is only 7 away from 550, so it's going to go pretty close to that midpoint, but it's going to be before the midpoint. Okay, if our number lands before the midpoint, should we round up or should we round down? Yep, we should round down. So if we round to the nearest 100, 543 would round down to 500. Here's the challenge problem. Now we're going to round to the nearest 1,000. I want you to try this on your own and then come back to the video to check your work. Pause the video here to try rounding 7,750 to the nearest 1,000. Okay, let's talk about your work. First, we need to underline the digit that's in the thousands place. I'm going to underline this digit here. This 7 is in the thousands place. Then we need to draw our blank number line and add our hatch marks for our endpoints and our midpoint. Remember, we're rounding to the thousands place, so that's the place value we're going to pay attention to for our endpoints. I keep that 7 in the thousands place for my first endpoint, and then I fill all the other place values with a 0. That makes sense because the nearest 1,000 before 7,750 is 7,000. To get my other endpoint, I'm going to add 1,000. What is 7,000 plus 1,000? 8,000. Good. For my midpoint, remember, I keep that digit that's in the thousands place or the place value that I'm rounding to. So I'm going to keep that 7. And then what am I going to put in the next place value directly to the right? I'm going to put a 5. What am I going to put in the last 2 empty place values? Zeros. The midpoint between 7,000 and 8,000 is 7,500. That makes sense because half of 1,000 is 500. Place your number on your number line if you haven't already. $7,750 is greater than 7,500 I know it's going to go after the midpoint. And because our number falls after the midpoint, are we going to round up or are we going to round down? Exactly. We're going to round up to 8,000. So I hope that rounding review helped you all, because rounding was looking a little bit like it was tough for us when we did math review a couple weeks ago. So remember, as you're doing your Edulastic assignment today, when you're rounding, make sure that you always do a number line with endpoints and midpoint. Remember how quickly we made these number lines? Number lines do not have to take long at all, but a number line will always help you get the right answer. So make sure to use a number line and don't not make one just because you think it'll take too long. It does not take long at all. Put the number you're rounding to on the number line and then decide if you should round up or round down. Now that you've finished this video, you should go on to Edulastic and complete your math review.